You're listening to Raised by Spirit, Bloodline by Design, written and narrated by ancestral medium Jenn LaFave. Introduction. Raised by Spirit, Bloodline by Design is the true story of a woman who answered the call of her ancestors. Through decades of personal evolution, as Jenn moves through loss, rebirth, and deep soul remembrance, readers are invited to step into the living current of their ancestral connection. In this current, you'll awaken to the truth that destiny is already written, quietly resting within your very being. As your remembrance rises, you'll begin to see the patterns that have shaped your daily life, revealing that each moment is a sacred initiation and a part of the divine plan. You'll be guided back in time with Jenn, as sacred knowledge moves silently through generations, becoming a path illuminated for those destined to remember and rise with her. More than Jenn's life story, this book is a declaration, a sacred decree, revealing the real inner work of remembrance, where, in the end, nothing false survives and only truth remains. From the moment Jenn was born, a luminous guide named Orion stood beside her. His presence was both constant and fleeting, appearing in times of profound change and vanishing when silence was required. At times he disappeared for years, only to return with revelations that shifted the foundation of her path. But Orion wasn't her only guide. Another was Cherokee Chief Cora, whose ancient voice rose through deception and revealed absolute truths to Jenn in the earliest seasons of her life. Yet for much of Jenn's early years, she had no understanding that these powerful messages were coming from an ancestor in her bloodline. It was only after Maggie, her maternal grandmother and Cora's daughter, passed away that her remembrance began to awaken. In that moment, Jenn realized that Cora was her great-grandmother, and that she had been living between two worlds since birth. Maggie's transition marked a pivotal turning point, an unshakable confirmation that Jenn was more than different. She was the keeper of the flame, living between shadows and illumination. Decree 1, the flame entered the bloodline. Passage 1. From the beginning, Jenn saw what others couldn't. Layered realms shimmered at the edge of her sight, and the echo of her dreams stirred an ancient remembrance that would rise through her with the weight of memory. She grew up alongside her older sister, a strong and intelligent presence who moved through the world with a kind of dignity and grace you couldn't help but admire. Their father's love rose around them like an indestructible shield, a force that made the world feel steady and sure. His very presence carried a different kind of strength, one where no words were needed. It was within his strength that Jenn could always find refuge, but her mother carried a different presence, one woven from shadows that stretched far beyond the edges of Jenn's remembrance. Within those shadows glowed a quiet ember, hinting at stories long hidden in the depths of their lineage, stories shaped by secrecy and control. Her mother had grown up drifting from state to state, never rooted in one place for long. First Tennessee, then North Carolina, then Florida, until the family finally settled in the red clay of Alabama. Her mother was one of 7 children. Her father, Richard, was a preacher whose sermons moved with them through the South, imprinting his shadows on every place and every soul he could. Her mother, Maggie, embodied the purest form of motherhood, offering herself with quiet sacrifice and steadfast devotion. Yet even Maggie's devotion couldn't shield the bloodline from the ancient shadow woven through it. Her maternal family history was veiled in secrecy. Stories drifted through the generations in fragments, incomplete and only half true, built on the belief that lies could pass as truth if repeated often enough. There were only 2 stories ever told about Jenn's grandfather. One claimed he died on Christmas Eve in 1958, choking on an orange peel. They said that if he had reached the hospital a few minutes earlier, he would have survived, or so the story went. The second story was more elusive. Jenn's mother often said her father would skip work just to hide behind the bushes across the street, certain he would catch Maggie being unfaithful. Yet despite these claims, she would always add how she longed to follow in his footsteps as a missionary. Not to mention, there wasn't a single picture of him anywhere, not on the walls and not preserved in the photo albums. No other stories survived. But the truth doesn't vanish. It arrives at its appointed time. And for Jenn, that moment arrived at just 7 years old, as Cora revealed the first truth buried within the bloodline. One night, as Jenn drifted into sleep, her breath softened as she slipped into a realm where remembrance rose to greet her. She was seated at the kitchen table, watching as Maggie cooked. The scent of cornbread and pinto beans curled through the kitchen air. Then, without turning, Maggie spoke. "Understand, it started in 1936, the year we were married," she said, her voice heavy as she removed the food from the stove. "My baby sister, a member of our church, just 15 at the time, pregnant by the man I had just married." She paused, turned to Jenn, head down, voice strong. The words hung between them, until Maggie finally lifted her head, her eyes finding Jenn's. "She couldn't take care of a baby, and no one else knew," she added. "I did what I believed was best, for my sister, for the baby, and for the family." "Your Uncle Richard," she said. "He wasn't my firstborn. He was my sister's, but I raised him as my own. To me, he was my son in every way." Maggie pointed toward the side door behind the kitchen, as though pulling the past into the room. "The deception didn't end there," she continued. "One child after another was born, until there were 7, all of them growing up under the shadow of a man who spoke holiness, but lived in hypocrisy." "Christmas Eve, 1958, Maggie continued, releasing a long-held truth. "That evening, while I was still shaping the orange rolls for midnight mass, Richard insisted on taking all the children to church early so they could complete their Christmas Eve obligations. He said it was easier this way, that I'd be finished by the time he came back for me, but I knew his plan to return alone carried a different intention." Her eyes drifted toward the counter. "I was right over there finishing the orange rolls when he returned, slithering quietly through the side door," she said, her voice carrying the weight of years. "You could feel his presence, like a shadow cast across the room. I knew what his intention was, but that night I refused to let his doctrine hold authority over me or my family any longer. I didn't know what I was going to do or what waited beyond that choice, but the moment he approached me from behind, something shifted. I quickly turned on instinct and ran for the side door, the air shifting as if the whole room ran with me. Richard followed, his footsteps closing in fast. I pushed through the side door with nothing in my mind but escape, and that's when I saw it. The rake. I grabbed it like it was the one thing that could save my life, swinging behind me with a force I didn't know I had, sending him to the ground, gasping. Everything happened so fast, she confessed. By the time I stood up, I just stared at him, breathless yet unafraid. For the first time, my strength rose above his shadow like a light that refused to die. Jenn watched the scene unfold as Maggie calmly walked into the house and called for an ambulance. The phone was pressed to her ear, yet her eyes stayed fixed on Richard as his hands clung to his throat, still gasping for breath. Then, a dispatcher's voice broke the silence. 911, what's your emergency? No emergency, Maggie said, but a man has been injured and is having trouble breathing. Here's the address. A long pause as distant sounds of the other operators filled the silence as she waited. Ma'am, there's an ambulance on its way. If you could stay on the... Maggie hung up and headed back to the porch. I knelt beside him and gave him the only truth left in me, she said. This is not your redemption, Pastor. If you come back here again, you will wish the flames return had been the one to greet you. Cora's voice echoed through the scene. Lies and silence have consequences. This truth doesn't belong to one voice alone. I have shown you one side. The rest will come. As the dream dissolved, Orion's voice thinned to a barely audible whisper in the deepest part of her memory. In time, you'll remember. Jenn opened her eyes, the details of the dream fading as she hugged her stuffed animals before slipping out of bed. Shaking off the last threads of sleep, she followed the warm scent of breakfast curling through the house. She settled at the kitchen table as Maggie moved with practiced ease, her sister beside her, helping in the quiet rhythm of the morning. Though Jenn was far too young to understand the depth of what had just been revealed to her, some truths aren't meant to be understood in a single moment. What Cora placed within her wasn't a dream, and it wasn't a burden. It was a truth woven into her memory, waiting for its time to rise again. That time returned to her years later in a dream where her grandfather Richard stood before her, stripped of every earthly trace. In that moment, he revealed himself as the presence of his soul. I need you to listen, he said. I failed. Not once, not twice. Again and again. I caused pain and destruction anywhere I could. His words carried something deeper than remorse as she watched his hand rise to his throat. I never went back, he said. Not that night. Not ever. Not to Maggie. Not to the children. By Christmas Eve, 1958, she knew. Another woman, another family. And what did I give them? The same thing I gave Maggie: control, abuse, fear. All I passed down was an inheritance of wounds, deceptions, and the shadows I casted. Jenn listened as an ember-like glow began flickering beneath his throat. Beside him, a weathered headstone emerged, its surface worn, the year 1960 carved deep into the stone. My destiny was neither quick nor merciful, he said. Each day that followed grew into a reminder that Maggie's blow had cut far deeper than flesh, until it was finally given a name: cancer. He inhaled slowly before continuing. Remember, for every soul born to break a cycle, there is another who creates them. Know that I was never designed to be redeemed in that lifetime. I was designed to reveal the shadowed ember to you. A quiet pause gathered around her as remembrance rose. Know this as well, he continued. Recovery is meant for your mother to achieve. The time has arrived for her to decide whether the shadowed ember consumes her flame or whether she sets it ablaze. And you, he said, you're the one the bloodline has waited for. What rose next was the darkness he turned into doctrine. I didn't preach devotion. I weaponized it, he said. I taught that women existed to serve, that obedience was their worth, that submission was their God-given duty. I hid my hunger for control behind the name of the divine. To question me was to question God himself, and I made sure they believed me. I twisted holy words into chains, reshaping scripture to justify my authority. I claimed Lilith was cast out for refusing to bow, using that deception as proof that any woman who resisted a man of God deserved the same fate. Her story became my warning: obey or else. Your mother was raised beneath that warning. This is the inheritance. This is the shadowed embers she must set ablaze. The dream dissolved, leaving only the echo of what Richard had told her. But his truth too remained. This was more than confession. It was the revelation of the deceptions that had shaped her mother's childhood. For 26 years, Jenn's mother never allowed herself ease in the company of young men, careful never to stay too long or appear too open. Every interaction became a measure of her worth, her fate shaped by his deceptions, long before she knew there was anything else to believe. That was until the summer of 1971, when two vastly different worlds collided, one shaped by deception and obedience, the other by a purpose that couldn't be questioned nor compromised. On the beach of Fort Lauderdale, Florida, with salt in the air and heat rising from the sand, their paths crossed in a way neither of them could have anticipated. Her mother spoke softly, her southern cadence weaving warmth into every word. Her father spoke with the rhythm of Staten Island, quick, certain, untouched. She grew up preparing to be a missionary. He had spent his early years learning independence and freedom through rebellion, yet his strength was different. It lived in the quiet command of his presence, in the effortless way people took notice without him ever speaking a word. He was like the ocean, vast, constant, unmovable. For the first time, her mother witnessed a different kind of strength, one that softened rather than hardened. He listened without expectation, and he loved without condition. His presence became something else entirely to her. A sense of safety settled into her bones, steadying her in ways she had never known possible. Their connection wasn't merely in passing, but a destined alignment of timing itself, meticulous and knowing. It unfolded at the exact moment required to redirect the life her mother had been taught was her destiny. Every plan, every belief carefully stitched into the fabric of her upbringing began to unravel over the next 3 years. Her dream of becoming a missionary, of preaching what she had been taught was God's word, dimmed slowly, fading like the sun sinking into the horizon. By 1974, they were married. 3 years later, their first daughter was born, and by 1983, they were expecting again. At 6 months pregnant with the promise of their second child, her mother was being guided toward a crossroads where choice and inheritance would soon collide. One morning unfolded like any other. Jenn's mother dropped her eldest daughter off at Maggie's house before heading to work. The familiar road stretched ahead, cars gliding past in an effortless rhythm, while logging trucks rumbled along, just another part of the day. Then, without warning, a snap, violent and abrupt. The straps on the truck ahead gave way. The logs broke free like caged beasts unleashed into chaos. She gripped the wheel, jerking it hard, tires screaming against the pavement as she fought to escape its path. But it was too late. A single log had rocketed forward, darting through her windshield, crashing into the back seat, the seat where her daughter had been sitting only minutes before. Burnt rubber, shattered glass, and splintered wood filled the scene. In an instant, the crossroads she had been moving toward collided. Though her mother survived the accident, it left 7 discs forever displaced, pain threading through her body, while Jenn continued to grow safely in her womb. Some might have called it a freak accident, a stroke of ill luck, a cruel twist of fate. But it was something more. It was a moment designed with the opportunity of choice. In truth, it was an opportunity to confront the beliefs that had taken root in the quietest chambers of her being. She could choose to rise from the depths of the ember or remain bound by the shadows deception casts. Then the day arrived. March 22nd, 1983. Jenn was born in the season of fire, arriving with the flame woven into her destiny and the ember that marked the shadow of her bloodline. The delivery room lay in silence. Exhaustion draped itself over her mother as a nurse stepped in, bearing with her more than just the small cup of painkillers resting in her hand. "We can finally give you something a little stronger for your back," she said, placing the cup in her mother's hands. She hesitated only a moment before lifting it to her lips, a quiet surrender. Suffering silenced in an instant, but the ease she felt that day carried its own shadow. In the weeks that followed, as the prescriptions kept coming, she sat across from her doctors yet again. "You have 2 options," he said. "Surgery, which is definitely risky and unpredictable, but it does offer a real chance for recovery. Or we can keep you on the painkillers. They work quickly and seem to be highly effective, plus they offer relief without the strain of surgery or side effects." The very word surgery terrified her, filled with too many unknowns, a path she couldn't trust. The painkillers, though, were already working, reliably easing her pain. In that moment, she made her choice. Still, destiny has its own design. It arranges many opportunities for choice, not just one. Each opportunity aligns with precision, allowing wisdom to gather in time so a truer choice can be made when the hour is right. By the early 90s, as Jenn began experiencing the quiet pull of remembrance, whispering their truth through dreams, her father began to travel across the northern East Coast, working in waste management, leaving for weeks and months at a time. His absence weighed heavily on Jenn's mother. Their separation only amplified the wounds she had yet to heal. Over the years, her painkillers became her survival, a quiet refuge she relied on long before distance entered their lives. The strain of separation only deepened what was already present beneath the surface. In a quiet act of relief, her parents made the choice to uproot themselves from the South, seeking stability in the North where her father was stationed. As Jenn and her family prepared to say their goodbyes, the room held a hush, the kind that settles before something sacred arrives. Maggie's voice cut through that moment, gentle yet wise. "Here," she said, "I made something for you." She walked into the hallway and opened the closet door. With deliberate care, she lifted out a knitted blanket, something meant just for Jenn. "All the love I have to give is woven into this blanket, and through its threads, I'll always be with you," she said, placing it in Jenn's hands with quiet devotion. Yet at the time, even her grandmother's offering couldn't shield her from the shadow quietly growing behind her mother's choices. By 1995, even with the family together again, the shadow of her dependency continued to grow, and the sheer volume of prescriptions their mother obtained raised suspicions that reached far beyond dependency. For well over a year, she had been under surveillance. Authorities convinced her usage patterns pointed to something beyond pain management, something illicit. One day, as destiny shifted into alignment, it pulled Jenn into its rhythm. She often found reasons to leave school early, a quiet arrangement between her and her mother where one phone call was all it took for her to leave without question. But on this day, when she called to come home early, her mother sent her father instead. Jenn knew something was off. Her mother was always the one to pick her up. When he arrived, his energy was heavy. He drove without speaking a word, his mind racing too fast for Jenn to understand what was going on, until she stepped through the door. What welcomed her wasn't revelation, but rupture. The DEA had broken down the doors, flipped mattresses, emptied cabinets, searching for anything that proved distribution. While agents combed through their belongings, flipping through paperwork, reading prescription labels, Jenn watched as her father sat beside her mother. After what seemed like hours, the agents began to piece it together. The medications weren't stacked for sale, nor were they hidden away for profit. There were no secret transactions, no larger operation waiting to be uncovered. What they found instead were years of prescriptions, layer upon layer, bottles upon bottles, and dependency disguising emotional wounds. In the end, there was no case to build. One by one, the agents packed up their files, closed their folders, and walked out the door, leaving behind not a criminal, but a wounded woman, exposed. In that quiet kitchen, she watched as her father reached for her mother's hand and held it, and beneath the wreckage of her exposed truth, she saw the depths of his love yet again. His presence was more than loyalty. It was a declaration that love is unconditional. He wouldn't abandon her when the shadows emerged. He would stand as a shield, evidence she didn't have to face recovery alone. This was more than a moment forced upon her. It was another opportunity of choice. One choice led toward recovery, the other toward self-destruction.